Welcome to the Tending Our Nets podcast, where we believe in the gospel of Jesus Christ. We encourage everyone to learn more. We work to equip believers to share their faith with everyone they know.
Welcome to the Tending Our Nets podcast. My name is Joshua Sherman, and I am your host here. Today, we're going to take a little bit of what we have learned so far and apply it to the specific situation of the early church in the first century and up until the reign of Constantine. You see, we've been talking about the context of gospel, recognizing that gospel wasn't just about Jesus Christ and Him crucified, but it was also about the victory of God, about Jesus becoming king. What did this mean when people started to proclaim the gospel in the first century? Well, there was actually competition. You see, different generals, different Caesars, different leaders had their own gospel. And to proclaim to be king over and against Caesar was to look for the ultimate trouble. So this, I think, is how we best make sense of persecution of Christians in the era of the early church. They were persecuted by emperors that thought that they deserved ultimate worship and allegiance because they were the head of the empire, because they reigned as Caesar, as king, and because they themselves were gods. The Christians refused to recognize most of this because they declared another king. They would not worship Caesar, but worshipped only God alone. They were also persecuted because people saw them as atheists. You see, the pagans around them worshipped many different gods, the gods of Greece, the gods of Rome, the gods of a different locality, whether city or region that they were in. And Christians denied that these gods deserved worship. Some of them even denied that they actually existed. This was seen as beyond the pale by the pagan neighbors of Christians. And so you would see, even locally, when there weren't kind of empire-wide persecutions declared, you would see Christians being persecuted by their neighbors for believing and proclaiming that there was only one God and that Jesus was king. We also see Christians persecuted, not for claiming that Jesus rised from the dead, right? Because that was seen as an oddity by the Greeks. It was seen as by the Romans as something that didn't make much sense. It was seen by the Sadducees as utter nonsense because they denied the resurrection. It was seen by the Pharisees in a little more positive light, maybe, because it was something that they kind of believed in, but they certainly didn't believe that Jesus had been raised, right? But that wasn't the problem. For the religious leaders, the Jewish leaders, the zealots, they would have been persecuting Christians for a number of reasons. One, they thought that they had blasphemed God, or perhaps that they were teaching something about Torah that contradicted the way that they understood the law. It's also possible that some of the religious leaders among the Jews were persecuting Christians because they wanted to protect their own position. You see, different Caesars had actually required that people offer sacrifices, offer worship, offer prayers to Caesar. This is something Christians obviously would not do, and it is something that Jews had refused to do before there was ever a Christian. In fact, they'd refused to do this so strongly that this had caused a number of revolts in territory where there was a concentration of Jewish people. This had caused so much trouble that the leadership in Rome had basically decided, you know what, we're just going to make this easy. We'll use what we usually do with syncretism a little bit differently. We'll allow for them to worship their God alone, but they will need to offer sacrifices and prayers for the empire, for Caesar, to their God. That was a compromise that the Jewish people, the Jewish leaders, were willing to make. But it's a compromise that may very well have been endangered when you had what the Romans saw as a Jewish sect that was unauthorized start to arise in Christianity. Christians did not have the same exception. They were not protected in the same way. They were required to worship and offer prayers and sacrifices to the emperor, to Caesar. If Christians refused to do this and continued to make a stink about it enough, Jewish leaders very well may have worried that that could bring persecution on them as well. And so we see a number of different reasons that Christians were persecuted in the early church up until Constantine declared Christianity as the official religion of the Roman Empire. But these didn't revolve around the gospel as we usually think of it. They didn't revolve around a carpenter in Judea being crucified, around people claiming that he had been raised from the dead. No. They centered on the fact that Jesus claimed to be God. They centered on the fact that Jesus claimed to be king. And that when people were proclaiming the gospel, they were proclaiming this God. They were proclaiming this king against Caesar, against the way that the Jewish leaders understood their scriptures, against the way that their pagan neighbors saw the spiritual world. This is what brought persecution in the early church. I hope that helps us as we try to understand the context of the early church and even how we see the world today as Christians. Thank you for tuning in. Next time, we are going to talk about the gospel and Christmas. And that one's pretty neat. So looking forward to it. Please like, subscribe, write reviews. You know what to do. Share this with your friends so that we can help to equip Christians to share the gospel with everyone they know. God bless. You've been listening to the Tending Our Nets podcast. If you like what you hear, check us out at the Raven Creek Social Club and by searching for us on social media via Tending Our Nets.
Raise us up to bear your